The Iridian Council Chamber, usually a symphony of shimmering scales and guttural pronouncements, was silent save for the rhythmic drip, 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 of nutrient fluid leaking from the life support cradle. Inside, Rhea, barely a hatchling, lay motionless, her once vibrant emerald scales now dulled with the pallor of paralysis. The chamber itself was a testament to Iridian pragmatism, vast, echoing, and cold. Polished obsidian walls met a vaulted ceiling crisscrossed with conduits carrying luminescent blue fluids, the lifeblood of the outpost. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of recycled atmosphere, a constant reminder of their isolation. Around the cradle, the Iridian Council convened. Their shimmering, iridescent scales rippled subtly as they shifted, but their obsidian eyes remained fixed on the motionless form within the cradle. Each member was a study in controlled emotion, their expressions betraying nothing of the life or death decision they were about to make. Counselor Iconian, his scales a shade darker than the others, broke the silence. His voice, a low, guttural rumble translated into clipped Galactic standard, echoed in the chamber. Resource Unit 734 continues to exhibit no signs of improvement. Her paralysis is complete. The drain on our nutrient reserves is unsustainable. Another counselor, her scales shimmering with an oily rainbow sheen, inclined her head. The diagnostic reports are conclusive. Her neural pathways are irreparably damaged. Further investment is inefficient. Iconian turned slightly, the movement deliberate and precise. I propose termination. Redirect her nutrient allocation to viable research programs. A murmur rippled through the council, a silent consensus forming. One by one, they signaled their agreement, their scaled heads dipping in unison. The decision was made. Rhea was to be abandoned, left to wither in the sterile embrace of the life support cradle. The doors to the chamber hissed open, and Brian Williams entered, his boots echoing on the polished floor. He was a human xenobiologist stationed at the remote outpost, his presence a jarring contrast to the sleek, emotionless Iridians. He had been summoned for a consultation on a separate matter, but the sight before him stopped him cold. He approached the cradle, his brow furrowed. Rhea lay still, her chest barely rising and falling. He recognized the signs of advanced paralysis. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice a little too loud in the oppressive silence. Iconian turned to him, his obsidian eyes devoid of warmth. Resource Unit 734 is no longer a viable asset. The Council has authorized her decommissioning. Brian stared at the motionless dragon, then back at the Council. Disbelief warred with anger. "You're just going to let her die? Her continued existence serves no purpose," Iconian stated, his tone flat. Brian shook his head, a surge of defiance rising within him. He'd seen too much indifference in his life, too many discarded lives back on Earth. He wouldn't stand for it here. "I'm taking her." Iconian's scales rippled, a subtle sign of displeasure. "That is against Council directives, human." "I'm a xenobiologist, not a disposal unit," Brian retorted, carefully lifting Rhea from the cradle. Her scales felt cool and strangely delicate beneath his gloved hands. "I'll examine her in my lab." He turned and strode out of the chamber, Rhea cradled in his arms, leaving the silent, disapproving Council behind. Brian's lab was a chaotic sanctuary, a small, cluttered space crammed with a hodgepodge of human and alien technology. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting Earth-made diagnostic equipment to Iridian life support systems. Holographic displays flickered with data, casting an eerie glow on the handwritten notes pinned to the walls, a mix of English and Iridian script. He carefully placed Rhea on a bio bed, its surface humming softly. As he began his initial examination, he ran a scanner over her small form, the readings scrolling across a nearby monitor. The extent of her paralysis was alarming. Her neural pathways were severely damaged, but the cause remained elusive. Iridian physiology was notoriously complex, and his understanding was limited. "Damn it," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. I need to figure out what's going on in that alien brain of yours. He began adapting a human neural scanner, recalibrating its frequencies to match Ria's unique physiology. It was a long shot, but he had to try something. The Iridians clearly weren't going to offer any help. As the scanner whirred to life, Brian noticed an unusual genetic marker in Ria's DNA, a sequence he couldn't identify. It was located near a region associated with neural development. Could this be the key to her paralysis? He wasn't sure, but it was a start. Back in the council chamber, Iconian watched a holographic feed of Brian's lab. His scales shimmered with barely suppressed irritation. The human's interference was problematic. He activated a comm channel. Ensure that Human Williams receives no further assistance with Resource Unit 734. Redirect all inquiries to other research projects. We cannot afford to waste further resources on a lost cause. Brian wrestled with the Iridian medical scanner, its multi-jointed arm twitching erratically as it attempted to map Ria's emerald scales. Error messages flashed across the console in rapid succession, a cascade of glyphs that mocked his attempts at translation. The air filled with the acrid scent of ozone as the scanner overloaded, spitting a shower of sparks. A low hum filled the lab, fluctuating in pitch. The hum, which was normally a stable frequency, was now oscillating. Brian frowned, checking the power conduits. "Damn it," he muttered, tracing the energy flow with a handheld sensor. The readings were inconsistent, fluctuating wildly. Someone was siphoning power, and not subtly. He tried accessing the Iridian medical database for more information on draconic neural pathways. Access denied, the screen flashed. Restricted clearance level. Brian slammed a fist on the console. Of course. Improvisation was the name of the game. Brian rerouted power from the atmospheric scrubbers, bypassing the main grid with a tangle of repurposed data cables and human-engineered capacitors. The lab lights flickered ominously, but the scanner whirred back to life, albeit with a strained whine. Finally, a preliminary scan. The holographic projection of Ria's brain shimmered in the center of the lab, a complex web of neural pathways unlike anything Brian had ever seen. "There," he murmured, rotating the image. "Something's definitely not right." Pockets of inactivity, entire sections dark and silent, marred the otherwise vibrant display. Ria's large, golden eyes focused on him, a flicker of something. What? Understanding, pity. For a fleeting moment, Brian saw an image superimposed on the lab, his childhood home bathed in the warm glow of a summer sunset. Then it was gone. What the? Brian blinked, rubbing his eyes. A glitch, probably. The scanner was jury-rigged at best. Still, he noted the anomaly in his log. Back to basics. Brian connected his personal datapad to the Iridian console, accessing his vast Earth-based medical database. He searched for analogous conditions, rare genetic disorders affecting neural development, paralysis, anything that might offer a clue. After hours of sifting through data, a potential link emerged. A rare human genetic disorder that caused similar neural degradation. The disorder was linked to a specific genetic marker, one that seemed eerily similar to a sequence he'd identified in Ria's genome. Could it be? He ran the sequence again, comparing it to the Iridian genetic database. The results were inconclusive, but a flag popped up. Sequence flagged. Project Chimera restricted access. Brian's heart pounded. Project Chimera. It sounded like a failed Iridian genetic engineering program. Outside the lab, Counselor Iconian watched from the shadows, his multifaceted eyes gleaming with cold calculation. He subtly adjusted the settings on his surveillance device, amplifying the audio feed from Brian's lab. Brian knew he was being watched. He needed to consult someone, but he couldn't risk revealing his suspicions to Iconian. He hailed Dr. Aris Thorne, a fellow xenobiologist, on a secure channel. "Aris, got a minute?" he asked casually. "Having some trouble with the scanner, keeps throwing up weird sequence errors. Anything similar on your end?" He kept his tone light, hoping Aris would pick up on the coded message. Scanner errors, you say?" Aris replied, his voice carefully neutral. "We had a few glitches in Sector Gamma. Seems the power grid is a bit unstable. You might want to check your isolators." The mention of Sector Gamma, a known dead zone for sensitive information, was Aris's confirmation that he understood. Brian attempted to run a genetic simulation, hoping to predict the long-term effects of the genetic marker, but the simulation crashed before it even began, spitting out a cascade of error messages. "Corrupted data," the screen declared. "File integrity compromised." Iconian sabotage was becoming blatant. Rhea shifted in her cradle, her scales flashing with a faint, unusual bioluminescence. A soft emerald glow pulsed beneath her scales, mirroring the frantic activity on the screens. She seemed distressed by Brian's frustration. Brian turned to Rhea, his voice softening. "Easy girl," he murmured, gently stroking her snout. "I know it's not comfortable, but I'm not giving up, okay? We'll figure this out." He re-examined the genetic sequence. It wasn't a defect. It was a modification, deliberate. Someone had intentionally altered Rhea's genetic code. The implications were staggering. Brian rubbed his tired eyes, a surge of grit coursing through him. He was one step closer. He had to keep going. He would understand what happened to Rhea and he would help her, regardless of the cost. Brian stared at the swirling helix of the modified genetic code projected on the holographic display. Emerald and gold strands intertwined, but it was the crimson sequences, starkly different from any known Iridian dragon DNA, that held his attention. He zoomed in, the image blurring into a complex tapestry of base pairs. "Definitely modified," he muttered, running a diagnostic program. The results confirmed his suspicions. The rogue sequences were synthetic, alien even to Iridian science. He isolated a unique protein expressed by these sequences, a complex molecule folding in on itself like a miniature origami sculpture. The analysis suggested it interfered with nerve conductivity, effectively severing the connection between Rhea's brain and her motor functions. But strangely, it also seemed to enhance activity in other regions of her brain areas typically dormant in Iridian dragons. Brian returned to the Iridian databases, his fingers flying across the console, searching for any reference to this protein. He found several entries, but each was locked behind layers of encryption that would make a human military AI blush. "Damn it," he hissed, pounding his fist on the console. Suddenly, a clearer image flashed in his mind, superimposed over the data on the screen. It was a file directory, the icon glowing with an unnatural intensity. He recognized the directory path it led to one of the heavily encrypted files he had just been trying to access. The image was sharp, detailed, far more vivid than the previous fleeting impression. Brian recoiled, his heart pounding. What was that? He glanced at Rhea, her motionless form bathed in the soft glow of the life support cradle. Could it be? He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. Rhea was somehow communicating with him, sending images directly into his mind, telepathically. Excitement surged through him, a potent mix of scientific curiosity and profound hope. This could be the key, not just to unlocking the secrets of her paralysis, but to understanding something fundamentally new about Iridian biology. He had to be careful. He couldn't let the Iridians discover Rhea's ability, not yet. They might see her as a threat, a weapon to be controlled. He had to protect her. He refocused on the console, pulling up the encrypted file Rhea had shown him. He ran a brute force decryption program, but the system barely made a dent. The encryption protocols were far too advanced. Hours blurred into a frustrating cycle of failed attempts. The lab door hissed open. Counselor Iconian entered, his obsidian eyes scanning the room with cold SC Doctor in Y. "Doctor." "Williams," he said, his voice a low, guttural rumble. "A routine inspection, just ensuring Resource Unit 734 is not consuming excessive power." Brian forced a smile, trying to appear nonchalant. Everything is within parameters, counselor. Just running some routine diagnostics, trying to understand the unique challenges presented by her condition. Iconian approached the console, his gaze lingering on the complex algorithms scrolling across the screen. Decryption protocols. What are you, a TED doctor? Ing to access Dr. Williams. His voice was now edged with suspicion. Brian feigned ignorance, quickly switching the display to a harmless diagnostic readout. Just analyzing her neural activity, counselor. Nothing of consequence. As you can see, there's very little activity to analyze. He gestured to the flatlining EEG readings, a calculated lie. Iconian's eyes narrowed. I trust you are not wasting Federation resources on a lost cause, Doctor. The Council's patience is finite. He paused, his gaze locking onto Brian's. Do not become attached. With a final, lingering look, Iconian turned and left, the door hissing shut behind him. Brian let out a shaky breath. He knew Iconian didn't believe him. He was being watched. He had to be more careful. He turned back to Rhea, his perseverance hardening. He had to trust her. Rhea, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of the life support systems. Can you show me the key? The decryption key. Rhea remained motionless, but Brian focused, opening his mind, willing her to respond. He waited, his heart pounding in his chest. Then a torrent of images flooded his mind, numbers, symbols, fragments of code, swirling chaotically, too fast to comprehend. It was like trying to catch a waterfall in a cup. The sudden surge of mental energy overloaded the lab's power grid. Lights flickered, then died, plunging the lab into darkness. The hum of the life support system sputtered and died, replaced by an ominous silence. Alarms blared, a deafening cacophony of red lights flashing in the sudden darkness. No, Brian yelled, scrambling to reroute power from the auxiliary systems. Rhea's life support was failing. She wouldn't survive long without it. He worked frantically, his fingers flying across the emergency control panel. As he struggled to restore power, Rhea, sensing his desperation, unconsciously lashed out. Another image, raw and visceral, slammed into Iconian's mind, an image of pain, of suffocating darkness, of utter helplessness. Iconian, halfway back to the council chambers, collapsed, clutching his head, a strangled cry escaping his lips. He saw nothing but darkness, felt nothing but agonizing pressure. He staggered to his feet, his face contorted in pain and rage. He now understood. The creature wasn't just a drain on resources. It was a weapon. Security team. He roared, his voice echoing through the corridors. Rem Doctor, Resource Unit 734 from Dr. Williams's lab. Immediately. The emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows across the lab. Alarms blared, a cacophony that grated against Brian's already frayed nerves. He wrestled with a sparking power conduit, the acrid smell of ozone stinging his nostrils. Damn it, he grunted, forcing the recalcitrant wires into place. The life support cradle sputtered, then hummed back to life, its rhythmic pulse a fragile victory in the chaos. He glanced at Rhea. Her emerald scales shimmered faintly under the emergency lights, but her eyes were wide and unfocused. A jolt, not electrical this time, but something else, hit Brian. A flash of disjointed images flooded his mind. Fractured landscapes, swirling colors, a sense of profound fear. He staggered back, clutching his head. Rhea, what was that? She blinked, her pupils contracting. Another flicker, this time a wave of nausea washing over Brian, followed by the sensation of limbs refusing to obey. He understood. She was trying to communicate, to share her experience, but the connection was broken, fragmented by her paralysis. He knelt beside the cradle, his voice soft. It's okay, Rhea, I'm here, just try to focus, show me something, simple, something you want me to understand. He placed a hand gently on her snout, feeling the faint tremor of her scales. I'm here to protect you. The lab doors hissed open with an ominous swoosh. Counselor Iconian strode in, flanked by two heavily armed Iridian guards. Their exosuits gleamed under the emergency lights, their weapons trained on Brian. "Williams," Iconian's voice was a low, guttural rumble. "Stand aside. The hatchling is to be transferred for observation and containment." Brian stood his ground, placing himself between Iconian and Rhea's cradle. "Observation, containment. She needs specialized care, counselor, care that only I can provide. Her condition is delicate." Iconian's multifaceted eyes narrowed. "Your concerns are irrelevant. The Council has determined that the hatchling represents an unacceptable drain on resources. Your attachment is illogical. Stand aside, human. This is a direct order." He gestured to the guards. "Seize the hatchling." "I can't let you do that." Brian activated a security override on his console. Red lights flashed and the lab doors slammed shut with a resounding clang. "Lockdown initiated. No unauthorized personnel may enter or exit." Iconian's expression hardened. "Insolence. You are in direct violation of Council decree. Deactivate the lockdown immediately or face severe disciplinary action." He barked an order at the guards. "Breach the door." The guards raised their weapons, focusing on the reinforced door. Energy crackled as their weapons charged. Brian knew he couldn't hold them off for long. He turned back to Rhea, his voice urgent. "Rhea, listen to me. They don't understand. They don't see what you're going through. Can you show them the pain, the feeling of being trapped?" Rhea, her eyes filled with fear, focused on the lead guard. She strained, concentrating with all her might. The guard suddenly stumbled, his exosuit momentarily malfunctioning. He clutched at his limbs, his face contorted in confusion. The second guard paused, momentarily disoriented. "Now," Brian yelled, grabbing a canister from a nearby shelf. He smashed it against the floor, releasing a thick cloud of smoke that filled the lab. Coughing, he scooped Rhea into his arms, cradling her against his chest. "Hang on, kid." He activated a hidden panel, revealing a narrow maintenance tunnel behind a bank of equipment. He squeezed through, the rough metal scraping against his skin. The alarm still blared, but the sounds of the guards forcing their way into the lab were growing fainter. The tunnel was dark and cramped, the air thick with dust. Brian crawled forward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear the muffled sounds of the security team behind him, their thermal scanners painting him as a bright red silhouette against the cold metal walls. He reached a dead end, a solid wall of plasteel blocking his path. Damn it! He was trapped. He could hear the security team closing in, their footsteps echoing in the narrow tunnel. Desperate, he activated his comms, his voice pleading. "This is Williams. Is there anyone out there? Iconian is acting without authority. He's endangering a research subject. He's covering something up." He knew it was a long shot, but he had to try. "There's something wrong with what they did to her." A crackle of static, then a hesitant voice. "Williams, this is Scientist Loran. I am monitoring the situation. Counselor Iconian has assured us that this is a matter of internal security." A pause. "I will investigate, but I cannot openly defy a council directive." Brian heard the subtle shift in Loran's tone, the hint of doubt. It was enough. He deactivated the comms, bracing himself for the inevitable. The tunnel entrance exploded open and the two guards stormed in, weapons raised. Brian stood his ground, shielding Rhea with his body. He knew it was over. Iconian entered, his expression a mask of cold triumph. "Foolish human," he sneered. "Your sentimentality has blinded you to the greater good. You could have been an asset. Now you are merely an obstacle." He gestured to the guards. "Confiscate the hatchling and detain Williams." Rhea, trembling in Brian's arms, focused all her remaining strength. A final image flashed into Brian's mind. A complex, swirling pattern, the double helix of a genetic code, a desperate plea for understanding. Then, darkness. The guards pried Rhea from Brian's grasp, her small body limp and unresponsive. He watched helplessly as they carried her away, her emerald scales fading into the sterile white of the corridor. He was left alone in the darkness, his heart pounding with a mixture of grief, anger, and a burning perseverance. He had to get her back. He had to expose the Iridian Council's secrets. He knew what he had to do. The council member, his iridescent skin now blotched with an unsettling purple, stumbled back from Rhea's cradle, clutching his head. What was that? He stammered, his compound eyes darting nervously around the chamber. Brian, his heart pounding, stepped forward, feigning ignorance. "Counselor, are you all right? Did Rhea do something?" He glanced at the hatchling, whose emerald eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Ignoring him, the council member hissed, "Security, I need a neural scan. Immediately." Brian knew he had to move fast. This was his chance. He mumbled a quick excuse about needing to check Rhea's vitals and hurried out of the chamber, the image of the genetic code seared into his mind. Back in his cluttered lab, a haven of human ingenuity amidst Iridian sterility, Brian replayed the image in his mind, focusing on the unique sequence of alien nucleotides. He brought up the Iridian genetic database on his console, the interface a chaotic jumble of symbols he'd spent months deciphering. With practiced fingers, he input the code sequence, initiating the search. A moment later, the screen flashed crimson. An alarm blared, a harsh, grating sound that sent shivers down his spine. A message in harsh Iridian script scrolled across the screen. "Restricted access. Level 7 authorization required." Brian cursed under his breath. Level 7. That was Iconian's clearance. He had to bypass it. He swiftly began inputting a series of commands, exploiting a known vulnerability in the Iridian security protocols, a loophole he discovered during a late-night coding session. Lines of code cascaded down the screen, a digital ballet of intrusion and defiance. Suddenly, a new window popped up. Unauthorized access DETCTED. Trace initiated. Damn it. He knew Iconian would be alerted. He had mere seconds. Ignoring the warning, Brian initiated a data transfer, a progress bar slowly inching its way across the screen. 1%, 10%, 50%, 90%. Just as the bar reached 100, the system locked him out, the screen turning a solid, unforgiving red. He'd made it, just barely. He quickly pulled up the downloaded file, his fingers trembling as he navigated the alien file structure. The data unfolded before him, schematics, research notes, genetic maps. And then he saw it, Project Chimera. The file detailed a genetic engineering program aimed at enhancing Iridian dragon abilities, increased fire resistance, stronger scales, improved flight. All for the glory of the Iridian military. But the data also revealed the unforeseen side effects: neurological damage, muscular atrophy, paralysis, Rhea's condition. It was a direct result of their unethical experimentation. A wave of anger washed over Brian, a fierce protectiveness towards the helpless hatchling. He needed help deciphering the rest of the data, understanding the full extent of Project Chimera. He thought of Aris, the Iridian scientist who had shown him kindness, a hint of empathy beneath the cold exterior. He activated a secure comm channel, his voice low and urgent. "Aris, it's Brian, I need your help." A pause. Then Aris's voice permeated with apprehension. "Brian, what is it?" "I cannot be seen talking to you. I know, but this is important. It's about Rhea. I've found something. About her condition, I need your expertise." Aris hesitated. "The council, they would not approve if I am caught." "I understand the risk, Aris, but Rhea's life could depend on it." Another long pause. Finally, Aris relented. "Meet me at the abandoned research station on the outskirts of the city. Sector Gamma 9. But be warned, Brian, this is unwise." Brian arrived at the abandoned research station under the cover of darkness, the air thick with the metallic tang of decay. Inside, the station was a labyrinth of rusted machinery and flickering lights. Aris was waiting for him, his usually impassive face etched with worry. "Project Chimera," Brian said, his voice tight with anger. "Rhea's paralysis. It's their fault, isn't it?" Aris nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. It was an attempt to improve the species, but the results were catastrophic. The project was shut down. But Iconian. He continued the experiments, didn't he? Aris looked up, his compound eyes filled with fear. Yes, in secret. He believed the potential benefits outweighed the risks. He is obsessed. Aris slid a small data log across the table. This contains more information about Iconian's activities. It is hidden, but I managed to retrieve it before the project was officially terminated. As Brian reached for the data log, a red alert flashed on his console. A message in Iridian script. Security breach DETCTD. Search initiated. Location, WILLIMS. B. They're coming, Brian hissed. They know. He quickly transferred the data from the new log to the same external drive. Suddenly, the door to the research station burst open. An Iconian security team stormed in, their weapons drawn. Iconian himself stood at the back, his face a mask of cold fury. Williams, he snarled. You are under arrest for sabotage and theft of classified information. Brian knew he was being set up. He glanced around the lab and noticed that weapons and other equipment had been moved around. As the guards moved to apprehend him, Brian quickly copied all of the data to an external drive. The guards surged forward, weapons raised. They grabbed him roughly, confiscating his equipment. Aris stood frozen, his face a mask of terror. Brian knew he had to act fast. As he was being dragged away, he discreetly slipped the external drive containing the data log into Aris's pocket, hoping against hope that the Iridian scientist would do the right thing. The interrogation room hummed with a low, almost imperceptible thrum, the sound vibrating through Brian's bones. Polished chrome surfaces reflected the harsh glare of the overhead lights, each facet a tiny mirror amplifying the sense of sterile confinement. Iconian, his chitinous face impassive, sat across the table, his multifaceted eyes like polished obsidian. The air tasted of ozone and recycled air, a metallic tang that CL Doctor, to the back of Brian's throat. Doctor. Williams, Iconian's voice, a synthesized rasp, cut through the silence. You are accused of espionage and sabotage against the Iridian Collective. These are grave charges. Brian leaned back in his chair, the cold metal biting into his skin. The charges are absurd, Counselor Iconian. My work here is strictly scientific. Iconian tilted his head, a gesture that conveyed something akin to amusement. Is it? Then perhaps you can explain this. A holographic projection flickered to life above the table, displaying a series of data streams and schematics. Brian recognized them instantly, fragments of the research logs detailing Ria's condition and his attempts to treat her. But they were distorted, rearranged, with fabricated annotations suggesting he was deliberately manipulating the data to conceal something. This is doctored, Brian said, his voice tight with anger. This is not my work. Indeed. Iconian raised a segmented hand and the projection zoomed in on a section of code. Note the embedded signature. Identifiable as originating from your personal datapad. Brian stared at the screen, his mind racing. It was a frame-up, crude but effective. That signature can be forged. I have security protocols, but they can be bypassed. Iconian's eyes narrowed. Your protests are noted. However, the evidence suggests otherwise. We are particularly interested in a certain data log. Its contents are sensitive. We believe it contains information detrimental to the collective's interests. Doctor used, his gaze unwavering. Its location, Dr. Williams. Brian tightened fists. He knew exactly what Iconian was after, the evidence of the Iridian genetic experimentation. He wouldn't give it up, not without a fight. I am under no obligation to answer that question. I invoke Article 7, Subsection C of the Iridian Research Protocol. I request legal representation. Iconian's patience seemed to fray, a subtle shift in his posture betraying his irritation. You are playing a dangerous game, human. This is not a request. It is an order. Cooperate and your association with the hatchling will be taken into consideration. Refuse and well, let's just say the collective has ways of ensuring compliance. Brian met his gaze, unflinching. I will not be intimidated. He knew he was buying time, but time was all he had. In the sterile corridor outside the interrogation room, Aris's carapace gleamed under the flickering fluorescent lights. His internal organs churned with a mixture of fear and guilt. He reached the designated rendezvous point, a rarely used server alcove, and quickly set to work, his delicate manipulators flying across the console. The data log, flagged for deletion by Iconian, was proving difficult to access. Each line of code felt like a betrayal, each keystroke a step closer to damnation. His mandibles clicked in nervous agitation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the transfer was complete. He ejected the drive, its smooth surface cold against his trembling appendage, and replaced it with a blank one. Aris presented the drive to Iconian, his voice carefully neutral. The data log, as you requested, Counselor. Iconian took the drive, his multifaceted eyes scrutinizing Aris's every movement. Is this the only copy? Yes, Counselor. I followed your instructions precisely. The original has been purged from the system. Aris's internal organs vibrated with fear as he spoke. Iconian held the drive up to the light as if he could see the DRA inside. Very well. You will continue to monitor Dr. Williams. Report any unusual activity. Aris inclined his head. As you command, Counselor. He turned and hurried away, the weight of his deception pressing down on him. In her enclosure, Rhea thrashed weakly against the padded restraints, her emerald scales dull and lifeless. A wave of anxiety washed over her, a cold, suffocating dread that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the facility. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She focused her mind, reaching out, searching for the familiar warmth of Brian's presence. It was faint, distant, but she could sense it, a flicker of fear, a spark of defiance. Desperate, she tried to send a message, a simple image of a protective flame, but her thoughts were scattered, fragmented. In the interrogation room, a sharp, fleeting image flashed through Brian's mind. A burst of emerald fire quickly extinguished. It was faint, distorted like a broken transmission, but he knew instantly who it was. Rhea. She was trying to reach him. A surge of adrenaline coursed through his veins. He closed his eyes, focusing his mind, pushing back against the oppressive atmosphere of the room. He pictured Rhea, her scales vibrant, her eyes filled with intelligence. He sent a message back, a warning, a plea, danger. Iconian, trust no one. Rhea gasped, her eyes widening. The image was fleeting but clear enough. Brian was in danger. Iconian was behind it. A surge of anger, hot and fierce, coursed through her veins, eclipsing her fear. The Iridians thought she was helpless, a broken experiment. They were wrong. Back in the server room, Iconian accessed the secure council server, his mandibles clicking in anticipation. The data log was there, intact, a pristine copy of the information he had tried so hard to suppress. Aris had betrayed him. A cold fury washed over him, a venomous rage that threatened to overwhelm his carefully controlled demeanor. Even worse, he intercepted a fragmented psychic message, a warning about himself. Iconian found Aris in the corridor, his footsteps echoing in the sterile silence. Aris, he said, his voice deceptively calm. A moment of your time. Aris turned, his multifaceted eyes widening in alarm. He knew somehow that he had been discovered. Counselor, is there a problem? Indeed, Iconian said, his voice hardening. There is a problem that requires a permanent solution. He raised a hand and a stunner pistol materialized in his grasp. You have proven yourself unreliable. Such weakness cannot be tolerated. Before Aris could react, Iconian fired. A bolt of energy struck him in the chest and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Iconian barked into his comm, seal off sectors 4 through 7. Initiate lockdown protocol. Containment level 5, no exceptions. He turned back to Aris, a flicker of disgust in his eyes. Let this be a lesson. Loyalty is rewarded, betrayal is not. Iconian stalked off, his chitinous footsteps echoing in the sterile corridor. His plan was simple: eliminate Brian, Rhea, and Aris and bury the truth forever. Rhea felt the shift in the facility's energy, a sudden, oppressive weight that pressed down on her from all sides. The air crackled with tension and the lights flickered ominously. She knew what was happening: a lockdown. They were trapped, but as the walls began to close in, something inside her snapped. A surge of power, raw and untamed, erupted from her mind, a telepathic wave that washed over the facility, overloading circuits, disabling security systems, and scrambling communications. Alarms blared, then abruptly died. Lights flickered and went out, plunging the facility into darkness. In the interrogation room, the energy field that had been holding him prisoner flickered and died. Brian felt a surge of hope, a wave of Rhea's power washing over him. He didn't understand what she had done, but he knew it was his chance. He lunged at the door, slamming his shoulder against the release mechanism. It gave way with a metallic groan, and he stumbled out into the darkened corridor. Iconian strode into Rhea's enclosure, the air thick with ozone and the metallic tang of fear. The restraints lay shattered on the floor, and Rhea stood before him, her emerald scales shimmering in the dim emergency light. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, and a faint telepathic hum filled the air. He could feel her power, raw and untamed, a force that defied all his calculations. He stared at the hatchling, his multifaceted eyes widening in a mixture of awe and terror. He now understood the true extent of her power, and the threat she posed to everything he had worked for. Brian cradled Rhea and her humming life support unit, the cool metal a stark contrast to the fragile warmth emanating from within the transparent shell. Every clanging footstep echoed in the sterile corridor, amplified by the frantic beat of his own heart. He had to find Aris, quickly. He moved with a practiced stealth honed from years navigating hostile alien environments, his boots muffled against the polished plasteel floor. He found Aris slumped against a wall in a darkened storage room, a thin trickle of iridescent blue blood snaking from a gash on his head. Unconscious but alive, Brian knelt, gently shaking the iridium. "Aris, wake up, Aris." Aris groaned, his multifaceted eyes fluttering open. He focused on Brian with difficulty. "Brian, you came. What happened? Who did this to you?" Aris winced, clutching his head. "Conian, he knows, the data log, you copied it, he knows." His voice was a strained whisper, each word an effort. Brian's blood ran cold. Iconian knew. That changed everything. "We have to get out of here now. He won't hesitate to kill you, Aris. He can't afford for you to talk." He carefully helped Aris to his feet, supporting his weight. Aris was still weak but could walk with assistance. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the corridor into near darkness before the emergency backups kicked in, casting long, distorted shadows. A low, guttural hum filled the air as the facility's backup generators roared to life. Alarms blared, a cacophony of shrill tones that grated on Brian's nerves. "What's happening?" Aris croaked, his eyes wide with fear. "Iconian's resetting the security systems," Brian said grimly. "He's locking down the facility." They rounded a corner and were confronted by two hovering security drones, their multifaceted lenses glowing with malevolent red light. Energy weapons were already charging, emitting a high-pitched whine. There was no way around them. Panic threatened to overwhelm Brian, but he forced himself to focus. He glanced at Rhea, nestled securely in her cradle. An idea, desperate but potentially viable, sparked in his mind. He didn't know if it would work, but they had no other choice. "Rhea," he said softly, hoping she could somehow understand. Can you do something to them? Anything." He didn't know if she understood him or if she even consciously registered his words. But then he felt a strange pressure in his mind, A flicker of images, sparks, short circuits, system malfunctions. It was fleeting, indistinct, but undeniably present. The security drones suddenly began to twitch erratically. Their energy weapons sputtered and died. One drone spun wildly out of control before crashing to the floor with a metallic clang. The other simply shut down, its red lenses fading to black. Brian stared in disbelief. Did she do that? Aris looked at Rhea with a mixture of awe and fear. Impossible. Iridian dragons don't have telepathic abilities. Brian ignored him, his mind racing. Rhea's paralysis had somehow unlocked a hidden potential, a telepathic ability to interface with technology. It was a long shot, but if she could do this consistently. Before he could fully process the implications, a distorted voice crackled over the facility's comm system. Security teams, lockdown initiated. Target priority, human male Brian Williams. Secondary targets, Iridian female Rhea, Iridian male Aris. Eliminate with extreme prejudice. They're coming, Brian said grimly. We have to move. He knew the facility's layout intimately, having spent months mapping its ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels. He led Aris and Rhea through a maze of narrow corridors, the air thick with the smell of ozone and stale recycled air. Rhea was surprisingly light, but Aris was slowing them down. They're getting closer, Rhea transmitted, her thoughts a faint whisper in Brian's mind. He felt a surge of protectiveness towards the hatchling. He was starting to care for the young dragon. Brian stopped at a junction, his eyes scanning the surroundings. We need to buy some time. He spotted a damaged power conduit and a discarded Iridian energy cell. An idea formed in his mind. Working quickly, he jury-rigged a makeshift trap, connecting the energy cell to the power conduit with a tangle of wires. This should create a nice little diversion. A moment later, the corridor behind them erupted in a shower of sparks and crackling energy, momentarily blinding and disorienting anyone who might be following. Nice work, Aris said, a flicker of his old self returning, but the respite was short-lived. The comm system crackled again. Williams, your attempts at evasion are futile. Resistance is illogical. Surrender and your deaths will be swift. He rerouted them, Brian muttered. He knew we'd try something like that. Aris stumbled, his breathing ragged. I can't keep going. Brian looked at Aris, then at Rhea. He knew they couldn't leave Aris behind, but helping him meant slowing down, increasing their risk of capture. We'll get you out of here, Aris, Brian said, his voice firm. He helped Aris lean against the wall. Rhea, are they close? Rhea sent an image of two heavily armed Iridians rounding the corner, their weapons raised. They were almost upon them. Suddenly, the grinding hiss of the laboratory doors echoed through the corridor as they slid open, revealing Iconian standing in the threshold. Your little game ends here, Williams, he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. There is nowhere left to run. Iconian raised his hand, a signal to the security team behind him. You have become a liability, Williams, and you, Aris, are a traitor. As for the hatchling, its existence is an anomaly that must be corrected. Brian stood defiantly in front of Rhea's cradle, shielding her from Iconian's gaze. You're not going to hurt them, Iconian. Iconian smiled, a chillingly devoid expression. I am not going to simply hurt them, Williams. I am going to eliminate them, and then I will erase all evidence of the genetic experiments that created this abomination. No one will ever know. A wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over Rhea. She focused all her mental energy on Iconian, channeling her anger and fear into a single, overwhelming telepathic pulse. Iconian staggered, clutching his head. His eyes widened in horror as his neural implants began to overload, sending searing pain through his brain. He collapsed to the floor, convulsing uncontrollably. Brian and Aris stared at Rhea in stunned silence. The air crackled with residual energy. The power that she had unleashed was terrifying. What was that? Brian stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He knew now that Rhea was more than just a paralyzed hatchling. Her powers were both a weapon and a potential key to exposing the Iridian Council's secrets. They escaped the laboratory, leaving Iconian writhing on the floor. They knew they were fugitives now, hunted by the entire Iridian Council, and they had a choice to make: expose the truth or run and hide. The Iridian wilderness pressed in around them, a tapestry of phosphorescent fungi clinging to towering, obsidian trees. The air hung thick and humid, carrying the scent of damp earth and something akin to overripe fruit. Brian, his fingers stained green with crushed leaves, carefully smeared the concoction across their exposed skin and clothing. The local flora, when properly applied, masked their thermal signatures from aerial surveillance. "Think it'll work," Aris rasped, his voice strained. "It has to," Brian replied, his gaze sweeping the dense foliage. A jolt, not physical but a mental tremor, ran through Brian. He stumbled, clutching his head. Rhea, nestled securely in the modified carrier on Brian's back, shifted slightly. Drones, approaching from the east. Her thought echoed in his mind, a raw, untamed projection. East. "We need to change course," Brian barked, veering sharply to the left. Rhea senses drones. Aris, his face etched with worry, followed without question. They plunged deeper into the alien forest, the ground uneven and treacherous underfoot. Soon the obsidian trees gave way to a canyon, a ragged gash in the landscape, its depths shrouded in shadow. "A ravine," Brian muttered, approaching the edge cautiously. "Can't go around it, too much time." Aris, already pale, swayed on his feet. I don't know if I can make it," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. Brian assessed the situation. The ravine was wide, at least 15 meters across, and the drop was significant. Aris would never be able to jump it, not in his condition. "We'll make a bridge," Brian declared, his mind already racing. He scanned the area, his eyes landing on a cluster of thick rope-like vines hanging from a nearby tree. "Those vines. And some of that Iridian cable I salvaged." He worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He secured one end of the Iridian cable to a sturdy tree root, then, with Aris's help, began weaving the vines into a makeshift rope. The Iridian cable, surprisingly strong and lightweight, formed the core of the bridge. Hours later, the fragile structure spanned the ravine. It swayed precariously in the wind, but it was their only hope. Meanwhile, back at the abandoned camp, the silence was broken by the harsh crackle of Iridian communication devices. Iconian, his scales shimmering with barely suppressed rage, surveyed the scene. The hastily extinguished fire, the discarded medical supplies. It was all too clear. "They escaped," Iconian hissed, his voice a low growl. "Establish a perimeter. Seal off the facility and the surrounding wilderness. I want them found." Deep within the forest, Brian tested the makeshift bridge. It groaned under his weight but held. "All right, Aris, you're up. Take it slow." Aris hesitated, his eyes fixed on the dizzying drop below. He took a tentative step onto the bridge, his body trembling. Brian watched him anxiously, ready to lend a hand if needed. The sun had begun to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape when they finally stumbled upon a hidden cave, concealed behind a curtain of shimmering moss. It was small, but it offered temporary shelter from the elements and, more importantly, from Iconian's forces. Inside the cave, Rhea stirred. Another jolt, stronger this time, flooded Brian's mind. But this wasn't a warning. This was something else. Images flooded his consciousness, a winding path through the forest, a shimmering waterfall cascading into a crystal-clear pool, a narrow crevice leading to safety. Brian gasped, reeling from the intensity of the vision. "Rhea, what was that?" Aris, his face pale, watched Rhea with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "What's happening to her?" "She showed me a path," Brian explained, his voice still shaky. "A safer route, away from the drones. A path," Aris scoffed. "How can we trust this? She's different, Brian. This power, it could be dangerous, uncontrollable." "She's not dangerous, Aris," Brian retorted, his voice hardening. She's intelligent, observant, and she's trying to help us. But we don't understand it. What if she leads us into a trap? And what if she saves our lives? Brian countered. Are you willing to risk everything on your fear? Aris remained silent, his gaze fixed on Rhea, who watched them with her large, emerald eyes. Brian sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I know this is a lot to take in, but we're out of options. We can't go back to the base, they'll be waiting for us. We need to find somewhere safe, maybe the human colonies. We can't do that if we are hunted down. He turned back to Aris. We follow Rhea's vision, cautiously, but we follow it. Unbeknownst to them, Iconian stood in the communication center, his attention focused on a string of coded data scrolling across the screen. Intercepted message from the base, an Iridian technician droned. Fragmented, but we've managed to piece together some key phrases. Human colonies, safe passage, Rhea's vision, Iconian scales darkened. Rhea's vision, they're relying on the dragons, abilities, narrow the search area, focus on potential escape routes towards the outer territories. Hours later, guided by Rhea's vision, they emerged from the forest into a rocky clearing. In the distance, huddled around a flickering fire, were a group of Iridians, but these were different. Their scales were dull, their movements hesitant, their clothing patched and worn. They were nomads, outcasts from Iridian society. As they approached, the nomads tensed, their hands reaching for crude weapons. They were wary of outsiders, especially those associated with the council. Rhea, sensing their fear, focused her mind. We mean you no harm, her thought echoed in the nomads' minds, a soft, gentle presence. We are fleeing the council. We need your help. The nomads hesitated, their expressions shifting from hostility to curiosity. One of them, an elder with deeply etched wrinkles around his eyes, stepped forward. Why should we trust you? He rasped, his voice rough. You are with the council. We are not, Rhea replied, projecting images of their escape, of Iconian's cruelty, of Brian's kindness. We seek only refuge. The nomads exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. Finally, the elder nodded slowly. We will grant you shelter, he said, his voice grudging. But know this, the council's influence spreads far. Even here in the outer territories, you are not safe. The nomadic Iridians, their scaled hides blending seamlessly with the ochre dust of the plains, guided Brian, Rhea, and Aris toward a jagged rent in the canyon wall. The air grew heavy, the scent of ozone and decay thick in the nostrils. Before them loomed a structure that defied the stark landscape, an ancient ruin swallowed by the sands of time, its obsidian walls etched with symbols alien even to Brian. This place, the lead nomad rasped, his guttural voice echoing strangely in the confined space, is where the council's knowledge began. Before the efficiency, before the cold logic, there was curiosity. He gestured to the ruin. Here they sought to unravel the secrets of life itself through genetic engineering. Aris, his weapon held at the ready, his multifaceted eyes constantly scanning the surroundings, grunted. And the council shut it down, I presume. What unforeseen consequences did they discover? Brian ignored Aris's skepticism, his gaze fixed on the crumbling structure. What kind of research was conducted here? Rhea, nestled in Brian's arms, shuddered. Her emerald scales, usually vibrant, seemed to dull in the ruin's shadow. It feels old, she whispered, her voice strained. Powerful, but also sad, like a memory fading. As they stepped across the threshold, a wave of cold air washed over them. The interior was a labyrinth of corroded metal and shattered crystal, the air thick with the metallic tang of long-dried blood. Strange symbols, unlike any Brian had seen before, adorned the walls, pulsing faintly with a ghostly luminescence. Suddenly, Rhea cried out, her body convulsing in Brian's arms. Visions flooded her mind, raw and overwhelming. Iridian scientists in sterile white suits, manipulating glowing strands of DNA, dragons suspended in tanks, their minds probed and dissected, a cacophony of alien voices filled with both wonder and fear. "Rhea, what is it?" Brian cried, his heart pounding. They were trying to connect minds," she gasped, her eyes wide with terror. To hear thoughts, to control them. Brian, remembering his own training in human psychology, knelt, pulling Rhea close. "Focus on my voice," he murmured, his hands gently stroking her scales. "Breathe with me, in and out. Imagine a calm place, a peaceful place, a forest, a beach, whatever makes you feel safe." He guided her through a series of slow, deliberate breaths, his voice a soothing anchor in the storm of her visions. Gradually, Rhea's convulsions subsided. The visions, though still present, became less intense, more fragmented. She saw glimpses of success dragons communicating telepathically, sharing thoughts and emotions, but also of catastrophic failure, minds collapsing, bodies writhing in agony. She saw the telepathic ability was deliberately introduced in some dragons, but later blocked due to its volatility, and how the Council was not ready to use it. Meanwhile, light years away, on a sleek Iridian warship, Counselor Iconian watched as a signal blossomed on his console. "They have entered the ruin," he hissed, his voice a rasping whisper. "Deploy the lockdown sequence. Seal them inside." Iconian's forces breached the Nomad's defenses with ease, their advanced tracking technology pinpointing Brian's location within the ruin. Back in the ruin, a klaxon blared, its piercing shriek echoing through the ancient halls. Red lights flashed, bathing the interior in an ominous glow. "Lockdown initiated," a cold, mechanical voice announced. "All exits sealed, security protocols engaged." Aris cursed, his weapon raised. "We're trapped." He pointed to a narrow fissure in the wall, partially obscured by rubble. "There, a passage. But it's unstable. I can feel the vibrations. It could collapse at any moment." Brian examined the fissure, his eyes scanning the crumbling rock. "We can reinforce it," he said, his mind racing. "Use the energy conduits from that deactivated terminal over there. Redirect the power flow to create a temporary structural support." Rhea, her senses heightened by the visions, cried out, "The lockdown. It's activating something else. Defenses, automated security drones." Without hesitation, Brian moved to the terminal, ripping out the energy conduits. "Aris, with me. Rhea, tell us what's coming." As Brian worked to reroute the power, Rhea's voice, infused with fear, filled his mind. "They're coming, small, fast, heavily armed, and the passage, it's collapsing." With a final surge of power, Brian activated the makeshift support system. The fissure shimmered with energy, the crumbling rock momentarily solidified. "Go, now," he yelled, shoving Aris and Rhea towards the passage. They plunged into the darkness, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Behind them, the security drones whirred to life, their energy weapons charging. The passage began to buckle and crack, rocks falling from the ceiling. Rhea, her eyes glowing with an eerie light, focused her mind on the drones. Images of blinding light, of twisted metal, of agonizing pain flooded their circuits. The drones faltered, their movements erratic, their weapons firing wildly. But the effort was taking its toll. Sweat poured down Rhea's face, her body trembling with exhaustion. The drones, though disoriented, were still functional, their weapons trained on her. A blast of energy seared past her, leaving a smoking trail on the wall beside her head. The rock dust still swirling around them. Brian didn't hesitate. He yanked a shimmering energy conduit from a derelict Iridian drone, its casing cracked and sparking, and began weaving it into the existing rock structure. "Aris, give me some of that human structural adhesive," he barked, his voice echoing in the confined space. Aris tossed him a canister, which Brian sprayed along the conduit's edges. The adhesive hissed, bonding with the alien metal and the crumbling stone. It was a patchwork solution, a desperate gamble, but it held, for now. "It won't last forever," Brian said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Let's move." As they pushed deeper into the tunnel, Rhea's mental state grew increasingly agitated. A tremor ran through her paralyzed limbs. There. Learning, she projected, her thoughts fragmented and imbued with pain. The drones, they're adapting to my interference. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the passage, intensifying until it became a physical force. Rhea cried out, clutching her head. The emerald scales around her temples flickered erratically. Sonic, they're using sonic weapons to break through. Brian cursed. He recognized the telltale signs of neural disruption. The Iridians weren't just disabling her, they were torturing her. He ripped open his medkit, frantically searching for a solution. Aris, shield her. Aris moved to intercept the sonic blast with his own body, but Brian knew it wouldn't be enough. He needed something to dampen the sound, to shield Rhea's sensitive mind. His eyes darted around the passage, landing on the mangled remains of a security drone. An idea sparked. Working with frantic speed, Brian tore components from the drone, a resonating chamber, a damaged energy regulator, and combined them with parts from his own equipment, a portable amplifier, a noise-canceling headset. It was a crude device, jury-rigged and unlikely to work, but it was all he had. He placed the makeshift sonic dampener over Rhea's head, adjusting the settings. The whine subsided, replaced by a low, rhythmic hum. Rhea gasped, her scales regaining some of their luster. Better, she projected weakly. Thank you. They pressed on, the air thick with anticipation. Rounding a bend, Aris stopped dead. Look, he said, pointing to a section of the wall. The stone was smoother here, almost polished and etched with intricate symbols. He ran his hand along the surface, triggering a hidden mechanism. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a small, dark chamber. Inside, rows of data logs lined the walls, their surfaces glowing with a faint, ethereal light. Data logs, Brian breathed. From the original experiments. He rushed inside, his fingers flying across the ancient interfaces. The logs flickered to life, displaying complex equations and holographic schematics. As Brian delved deeper into the data, his expression hardened. He saw the specific genetic modifications that had caused Rhea's paralysis, the deliberate manipulation of her neural pathways. He also saw something else, a suppressed potential. The logs revealed that Rhea's telepathic abilities were a side effect of the genetic tampering, an unintended consequence that the Council had actively tried to eliminate. They knew, Brian said, his voice tight with anger. They knew about her abilities. They suppressed them because they feared them. But there was more. Buried within the data was a faint glimmer of hope, a potential method for restoring Rhea's mobility, a complex sequence of gene therapy utilizing specific enzymes and targeted energy pulses. It was a long shot, a dangerous procedure, but it was a chance. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the passage behind them. The chamber shook, dust raining down from the ceiling. They're through. Aris shouted, Iconian's forces are coming. Brian didn't hesitate. He grabbed the data log containing the gene therapy sequence and shoved it into his pocket. We have to go. They burst from the chamber, sprinting back through the tunnel. Rhea, despite her pain and exhaustion, focused her telepathic abilities, creating illusions in the minds of their pursuers. Images of collapsing tunnels, phantom creatures, and dead ends flickered in their vision, disorienting them and slowing their advance. As they fled, one of Rhea's illusions revealed something unexpected, a glimpse of a vast, subterranean chamber filled with strange machinery and pulsating energy fields. The ruins. Rhea projected, her voice strained. They were built near something. An ancient hibernation chamber. Brian's mind raced. A hibernation chamber, a place of suspended animation, of advanced medical technology. Could it be? Could it hold the key to Rhea's cure? That gene therapy sequence, he said, his voice filled with renewed hope. It might be possible to perform it using the technology in that chamber. They reached the end of the passage, emerging into a larger cavern. Before them stood a massive, circular door, its surface shimmering with an intricate network of energy fields, the entrance to the hibernation chamber, but it was sealed shut and guarded by a powerful energy barrier. Behind them, the sounds of Iconian's forces grew louder. They were trapped. Eris drew his weapon, his face grim but resolute. "Go," he said, his voice firm. "I'll hold them off, buy you some time." "Eris, no," Brian protested. "There's no other way," Eris said, his eyes locking with Brian's. "Get Rhea to that chamber, that's all that matters." Rhea, sensing Eris's sacrifice, focused all her remaining energy on the energy field. Her scales glowed with an intense emerald light, and her mind reached out, probing the field's intricate structure, searching for a weakness. With a surge of power, she managed to disrupt the field, creating a small, shimmering opening. But the effort was too much. Her eyes rolled back in her head and she collapsed, her body limp and lifeless. Brian stared at Rhea, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw the opening in the energy field, a narrow window of opportunity. He knew that entering the chamber was a risk, that he would be exposed and vulnerable. But he also knew that he couldn't let Rhea's sacrifice be in vain. He took a deep breath, his eyes filled with grit. "For Rhea," he whispered. And then he stepped through the opening, into the unknown. Brian stepped through the shimmering energy field and into the hibernation chamber. It was smaller than he'd expected, a stark contrast to the sprawling, utilitarian corridors of the Iridian base. The air hung cold and still, carrying a faint metallic tang. A single pedestal dominated the room, its surface a smooth, obsidian-like material etched with glowing glyphs. Complex Iridian controls, unlike anything he'd seen before, adorned its surface. As he approached, the chamber hummed to life. Holographic projections flickered into existence above the pedestal, displaying a swirling cascade of emerald green strands, Rhea's genetic structure, rendered in impossible detail. Diagnostic readouts scrolled in a language Brian couldn't decipher, but the sheer volume of data was overwhelming. It was as if the chamber was trying to explain everything about Rhea in a single, incomprehensible burst. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the smooth surface of the pedestal. He tried a simple touch, a press, a slide, nothing. The controls remained stubbornly unresponsive to human interaction. Frustration tightened his jaw. He was used to jury-rigging, to forcing solutions, but this was a whole new level of alien. Then a flicker in his mind. Not a sound, but an image, fragmented and indistinct. A glowing core, a network of lines, a sense of pressure. He stumbled back, hand flying to his head. Rhea. She was regaining consciousness, and somehow she was showing him. He focused, trying to interpret the jumbled impression. The chamber's core. A manual override. Hope surged through him. He ran his hands along the pedestal again, this time searching for something hidden, something out of place. His fingers brushed against a seam, almost invisible against the smooth surface. He pressed. A section of the pedestal slid away, revealing a hidden panel. Inside, a chaotic tangle of energy conduits snaked around crystalline structures that pulsed with a soft, internal light. It was a mess of alien engineering, beautiful and terrifying in its complexity. Suddenly, the holographic projections intensified. A low, resonant tone filled the chamber as the system initiated a diagnostic scan. Red glyphs flashed across the holographic display, converging on a single point in Rhea's genetic code. Then, a chillingly simple message appeared, translated into basic. Genetic anomaly detected. Recommend full system reset. Brian felt a cold dread grip his heart. A reset. It would wipe everything, revert Rhea to a baseline state. What if it erased her telepathic abilities? What if it caused further damage to her already fragile nervous system? He pictured her trapped and alone, the faint spark of connection extinguished. Word from Eris crackled through his comm. First wave down, but I'm hit bad. Ammo's low. Brian grit his teeth. He was on his own here. He looked back at the exposed panel, at the chaotic network of energy conduits. There had to be another way. He couldn't just stand by and let the system erase Rhea. He had to reroute the energy flow, bypass the automated reset. He grabbed his toolkit, a jumble of human and Iridian components he'd cobbled together over the past few weeks. He needed to create a manual interface, a way to control the energy flow directly. He remembered his old electrical engineering textbooks, the diagrams of circuits and resistors, the principles of grounding and voltage. Human knowledge, applied to alien technology. He began carefully disconnecting the energy conduits, his movements precise and deliberate. He used his multi-tool to strip the alien wiring, revealing the shimmering, silver strands beneath. Then he began connecting his own makeshift interface, a tangle of wires and converters scavenged from his lab. As he worked, the chamber's systems grew increasingly unstable. The lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows. The air crackled with static electricity. Alarms blared, their tones harsh and discordant. The scent of ozone filled the air, sharp and acrid. A wave of dizziness washed over him. He stumbled, catching himself on the pedestal. The energy levels were reaching a critical point. He could feel it in the air, in the vibrations of the floor, in the frantic pounding of his heart. Then, a jumbled impression slammed into his mind. Heat, pressure, danger. Rhea was trying to warn him, but her telepathic message was fragmented and garbled like a broken transmission. He fought to focus, ignoring the alarms and the dizziness. He adjusted the frequency of his equipment, tweaking the settings with a steady hand. Slowly, painstakingly, he managed to stabilize the energy flow. The lights flickered less violently, the alarms subsided to a dull roar. But something had shifted. The chamber's primary function, the targeted repair of Rhea's paralysis, was blocked. The rerouted energy was now flowing into a different system, one designed for revitalization. A stream of revitalizing energy pulsed out from the core, bathing Rhea in a warm, golden light. It was a surge of raw power, designed to stimulate growth and regeneration, but it wouldn't fix the underlying paralysis. It would only make her stronger, faster, more resilient, but still unable to move. He stared at Rhea, bathed in the golden light, her scales shimmering with renewed vitality. He had stabilized the chamber, averted disaster, but he had also changed the equation. Now he had a choice. Allow the reset, risk losing Rhea's abilities and potentially harming her further, or allow the burst of energy, accepting that it wouldn't cure her paralysis but would instead make her a powerful but still trapped dragon. The decision weighed on him, heavy and suffocating. Brian made the choice. He released the surge. The energy slammed into Rhea. Emerald scales flared, momentarily blinding, then pulsed with an inner light, a bioluminescent heartbeat visible beneath the armored plates. A high-pitched whine, almost ultrasonic, filled the chamber, vibrating in Brian's teeth. Then a torrent, not of sound but of sensation. Images flooded his mind, unbidden, unwelcome. Rhea's fear, raw and primal, a hatchling's terror at being alone in the vast, cold universe. Memories fractured and jumbled. Cold metal tables, blinding lights, Iridian figures looming over her, their faces obscured by sterile masks. He saw needles, felt phantom pains, witnessed experiments. Twisted, grotesque manipulations of dragon embryos, genetic alterations performed with chilling detachment. A chorus of alien voices echoes in his mind, discussing Rhea as if she were nothing more than a collection of data points. Brian staggered back, hands flying to his head, a strangled cry escaping his lips. The onslaught was too much, a psychic tidal wave threatening to drown him in Rhea's pain. He felt his knees buckle. The sterile floor rushed up to meet him. Then a wave of calm washed over him, not his own. Rhea. He could feel her presence, a gentle pressure against the chaos in his mind, a soothing balm on his raw nerves. She was shielding him, filtering the overwhelming sensory input, creating a pocket of peace within the storm. Brian gasped, pushing himself up, his head swimming. Rhea's glow had subsided, but her eyes, usually wide with fear, now held a glimmer of understanding, of control. He knew then with chilling certainty that the surge had done more than just unlock her telepathic potential. It had unleashed a force he barely understood, a potentially dangerous force. A klaxon blared, cutting through the lingering psychic haze. Aris's voice crackled over the comm system, strained and desperate. Breach. Sector 7 compromised. Iconian's forces. They've regrouped. They're coming for you, Doctor. Brian scrambled to his feet, adrenaline surging through his veins, overriding the lingering effects of Rhea's surge. He glanced at the hibernation chamber's reinforced door, then back at Rhea. Her eyes were locked on his, conveying a silent urgency. Iconian. Impatient, ruthless Iconian, not content to send his lackeys. He was leading the assault personally. "We have to get out of here," Brian said, his voice tight. The paralysis cure was irrelevant now. Rhea's safety and Aris's was paramount. Rhea focused, her brow furrowed in concentration. The hibernation chamber's security panel flickered, then died. A section of the wall shimmered, revealing a narrow, darkened tunnel, a hidden escape route. How? Brian started, but Rhea simply tilted her head, her eyes glowing faintly. He understood. She had disabled the system, bypassed the security protocols, all with her mind. They moved quickly, Brian leading the way, his pulse rifle raised. The tunnel was cramped and claustrophobic, the air thick with the musty scent of disuse. They encountered pockets of resistance. 2 Iridian soldiers guarding a junction, another patrolling a narrow corridor. Rhea didn't hesitate. A flicker of her eyes, a silent command, and the soldiers stumbled, clutching their heads, disoriented and confused. Brian moved swiftly, disabling them with well-aimed stun blasts from his modified pulse rifle. They reached the main research lab, the scene a chaotic mess of overturned equipment and sparking wires. Aris was slumped behind a reinforced console, clutching a bleeding wound in his side. "Doctor, they're after the dragon," Aris gasped, his face pale with pain. "Iconian. He wants her alive. He's going to take her back to the council. For more experiments." Brian's blood ran cold. Iconian's obsession with Rhea wasn't just about eliminating a perceived threat. It was about her unique genetic structure, the secrets hidden within her DNA, the horrifying legacy of the Iridian experiments. Rhea tensed, a low growl rumbling in her throat. She closed her eyes, focusing her power. Iconian was close, he could feel him, a cold, calculating presence filled with dedication. She reached out not with force but with understanding. She showed him what she felt, what she had seen, the pain, the fear, the violation. She showed him the experiments. She showed him the truth. A strangled cry echoed from the hallway. The sounds of battle abruptly ceased. Brian risked a glance. Iconian stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide with horror, his usually impassive face contorted in an expression of revulsion. Brian didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, disarming the Iridian commander and pinning him against the wall. Iconian chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Fools," he spat. "It's already too late. The experiments, they've already begun. There is nothing you can do to stop it." Brian stared at Iconian, the Iridian's words sending a chill down his spine. Rhea, Aris, and himself were now prisoners with very little hope. How could they possibly get out of this situation? Rhea looked at Brian and sent an image to him, a memory of when she was in the lab, and a hidden door that he did not know about. Brian, Rhea, and Aris now had to decide how to use Iconian to discover more about the Iridian Council and the experimentation, and they had Iconian to thank for the hidden door that he just revealed. Brian leaned closer, his gaze unwavering. "Iconian, you said the experiments have already started. What experiments? What did you mean?" Iconian, still strapped to the biochair, offered a smug reptilian smile. "Merely a figure of speech, human, a way to illustrate our proactive approach to galactic development." Aris, hovering nearby, fidgeted with his manipulator claws. "Brian, perhaps we should reconsider this approach. Counselor Iconian is unlikely to cooperate under duress." We risk provoking the council, giving them justification for countermeasures. Rhea, her emerald eyes fixed on Iconian, shifted slightly in her cradle. He's lying, I can feel it. Her voice, still weak, resonated with a newfound certainty. Let me, I can, reach him, see what he's hiding. Brian turned, concern etched on his face. Rhea, I don't know. Probing someone's mind like that, especially an Iridian, it's dangerous. We don't know the potential consequences. What consequences are worse than letting them continue? Rhea countered, her voice gaining strength. I can control it, Brian. I have to, for me. For everyone. Brian hesitated, torn between his ethical reservations and the desperate need for answers. He glanced at Aris, who remained impassive. All right, he said finally, turning back to Rhea. But we do this with safeguards, neural dampeners, psychic shields. I'm not letting you fry your brain or his. He worked quickly, connecting a series of modified human and Iridian devices to Rhea's cradle and Iconian's biochair. The air crackled with terrifying energy. Ready? He asked, his voice tight with apprehension. Rhea closed her eyes, focusing. A faint shimmer enveloped her, then spread towards Iconian. Brian monitored the readouts, his fingers dancing across the control panel. Suddenly, Rhea gasped, her body convulsing slightly. Barriers, strong, distorted images. Brian adjusted the dampeners, his brow furrowed. Push through, Rhea, gently. Just look. Rhea strained, her face contorted in concentration. Then a torrent of images flooded her mind. Sterile laboratories bathed in cold, blue light, grotesque creatures suspended in nutrient tanks, Iridian scientists manipulating genetic code with detached precision. Genetic manipulation. Abominations. Rhea whispered, her voice filled with horror. Then a new image, sharper, more terrifying. A human form strapped to a table, its DNA being forcibly altered. A wave of pain, of violation, washed over Rhea, so intense she nearly blacked out. She recoiled, breaking the telepathic link. Iconian slumped in his chair, unconscious. Rhea lay trembling in her cradle, her emerald scales dulled with sweat. Brian rushed to her side, his face pale. Rhea, what did you see? What happened? Rhea struggled to speak, her voice hoarse. Humans, they're experimenting on humans, altering their DNA. Brian staggered back, reeling from the revelation. That's impossible. Why? Aris, his usual composure shattered, stepped forward. There are rumors, whispers of secret research facilities dedicated to unconventional genetic manipulation, but I assure you I have no knowledge of human involvement. Brian ignored him, his mind racing. The Iridians experimenting on humans. It couldn't be, but Rhea's vision. It felt too real, too visceral. He had to know the truth. He had to protect Earth. Driven by a newfound urgency, Brian began poring over old data logs, intercepted communications, anything that might shed light on the Iridian Council's interest in humans. Days blurred into nights as he sifted through mountains of information, fueled by caffeine and a growing sense of dread. Finally, he found it, a coded message buried deep within a seemingly innocuous trade agreement. Decrypted, it revealed a planned expedition to Earth centuries ago, seeking unique genetic material for developmental enhancement. Brian felt a cold knot form in his stomach. They had been planning this for centuries, but why? What were they hoping to achieve? He looked at Rhea, still recovering from the mental probe. He was torn. Exposing the Iridians' crimes could trigger a galactic war, but keeping silent meant condemning countless others to their horrific experiments. Rhea, sensing his conflict, reached out to him telepathically, not with words but with images. Visions of a galaxy enslaved, its inhabitants reduced to mere test subjects, their DNA twisted and warped to serve the Iridians' twisted ambitions. A complete takeover of the galaxy. Brian's commitment hardened. He had to expose them. He had to warn the galaxy, even if it meant war. Suddenly, Aris's voice cut through the tense silence. Commander Williams, I am detecting a massive energy surge near the outpost. It appears to be an Iridian warship. Iconian stirred, a malevolent grin spreading across his face. Ah, reinforcements. They have come to retrieve me, and to eliminate any loose ends. Brian exchanged a grim look with Rhea and Aris. They were trapped, outnumbered, and facing a technologically superior enemy, but they wouldn't go down without a fight. Prepare for battle, he said, his voice resonating with steadfast perseverance. It seems we're about to have company. The hum of the hangar bay was a low thrum against Brian's teeth, a vibration that amplified the sudden sharp scent of ozone stinging his nostrils. Iridian rifles, polished to a mirror sheen, leveled on them. Aris flinched, his hand instinctively reaching for the pulse pistol at his hip. Then klaxons blared, strobing red light washing over the scene. Aris swore, his voice tight with panic. Brian, we're being hailed. The Claw of Xantus is demanding Iconian and threatening to terminate all research. Brian's eyebrows furrowed. He ignored Aris, his gaze fixed on the Iridian soldiers. Aris, prep the planetary escape shuttle. Full diagnostics. Rhea, stay close. He needed to buy them time to formulate a plan, time to get the hell out of here. A jolt like a static shock ran through Rhea. She gasped, her emerald scales shimmering faintly. Images flooded her mind, jagged metal, the oppressive weight of a warship, the cold, brutal intent of Iridian soldiers. They don't want just Iconian, she whispered, her voice trembling. They're going to destroy the outpost, after they take him. Brian's eyes narrowed. Damn it. He glanced at the far end of the hangar, at the bulky silhouette of the experimental energy weapon. It was their only chance, a desperate gamble. Aris, how close are we to full power on the Stingray? Aris's face was pale. Brian, that thing's unstable. You saw the simulations. It could overload, vaporize half the outpost. And what's the alternative, Aris? Let them incinerate us all, Brian snapped. We need to disable that warship, give us time to escape. He turned to Rhea, his expression softening. Rhea, can you reach them, the soldiers on the warship? Just delay them, make them hesitate. Rhea recoiled, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know if I can control it, Brian. What if I hurt them? What if I lose control? We don't have a choice, Brian said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. I trust you, Rhea, just focus. Think of what they're planning to do, think of protecting us. Rhea closed her eyes, her small body trembling. She focused her mental energy, reaching out, searching for a mind, any mind on the Claw of Xantus. She latched onto the captain, a rigid, unyielding Iridian. Then she pushed. A wave of nausea slammed into the Iridian captain, a dizzying disorientation that blurred his vision and sent him staggering. His mandibles clicked in confusion. Report, he barked, his voice thick. What is the meaning of this delay? The launch of the boarding parties was postponed. Brian grabbed Aris's arm. Now, to the control room. They sprinted toward the energy weapon control room, bypassing security protocols with practiced ease. Sparks flew as Brian rerouted power conduits, his movements precise and efficient. We need to overload their shields, he muttered, his fingers flying across the console. A highly focused beam. Risky, but it's the only way. He recalibrated the weapon, pushing its energy output to the limit. The air crackled with static. As he prepared to fire, a warning klaxon screamed. Sabotage! Aris yelled, pointing to the targeting system. The beam's off course. Iconian, Rhea gasped. Images flashed in her mind, Iconian's smug face, his clawed hand manipulating the controls. He's trying to kill us all. Without hesitation, Rhea focused her newfound telepathic ability on Iconian. A wave of pure, raw fear washed over him, a primal terror that paralyzed him in place. He stumbled, hissing in confusion. Brian seized the opportunity, manually rerouting the targeting system. Sweat dripped from his brow as he locked onto the Claw of Xantus. Here we go, he muttered. He pounded his fist on the firing button. The energy weapon unleashed a blinding beam of pure energy. The outpost shuddered as the weapon discharged, its frame groaning under the strain. The beam struck the claw of Xantus with devastating force, causing a massive energy surge that overloaded the warship's shields, causing them to flicker and die. But the weapon was damaged, sparks flying from the control panel and smoke pouring from the casing. Before they could celebrate, a new alarm blared. "Fighters!" Aris screamed. "They've launched fighters, they're attacking the outpost." Explosions rocked the station and communication lines were cut off, and they were truly alone now. Brian barked orders. "Aris, get to the escape shuttle. Load it with everything, supplies, research data, everything that can expose what they've done." "What about you?" Aris demanded. "I'll cover your escape," Brian said grimly. "No," Rhea said, her voice firm. "I'm staying with you. I can help, more than you know." "Brian, we can't just leave him here," Aris said, gesturing towards Iconian. "He needs to be brought to justice. We need to show the galaxy what he did." Brian hesitated. "Aris, we don't have time. We can't risk Rhea's life for him. It's not worth it." Rhea turned to Aris, her eyes filled with a strange calm. "I can get the information from him," she said softly, "but we need to move. Now." As they raced toward the escape shuttle, a squad of Iridian soldiers, led by Iconian, emerged from the shadows. Weapons raised, they blocked their path. Brian, Rhea, and Aris were trapped in the outpost hangar bay, surrounded. "Aris, diversion, now!" Brian barked, already gripping Rhea's chair, his fist clenched. The overhead lights flickered, a prelude to the station's emergency power kicking in. Aris, without a word, yanked 2 smoke grenades from his belt and hurled them into the corridor. A thick, acrid cloud billowed outwards, choking the air. He followed it with a sonic disruptor, the high-pitched whine assaulting the Iridian's sensitive hearing. "Focus, Rhea," Brian urged, his voice tight. He knelt beside her chair, placing a hand on her scaled arm. "Think of calm, think of emptiness, then push." Rhea closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Brian felt a faint tremor in her arm, a ripple of energy passing between them. Then, a wave of raw, unfocused emotion washed over him: fear, confusion, a primal sense of panic. He amplified her intent, focusing it, directing it outwards. The effect was immediate. A guttural roar of confusion echoed from the corridor. Iridian soldiers stumbled blindly through the smoke, clutching their heads, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. The carefully drilled precision of their attack dissolved into panicked chaos. "Move!" Brian shouted, pushing Rhea's chair forward. Aris, firing bursts from his stun rifle, cleared a path through the disoriented soldiers. Brian steered Rhea, avoiding the flailing limbs and thrashing tails. He winced as an Iridian soldier blundered into a console, sending sparks flying, but pressed on. He used non-lethal force, shoving soldiers off course and aiming for pressure points, always prioritizing escape over harm. Suddenly, Aris swore, "Iconian's trying to slip away." He pivoted, firing a stun blast that caught Iconian in the back. The counselor crumpled to the floor, unconscious. "Leave him!" Brian yelled, but Aris was already dragging Iconian's limp form towards them. "We might need him," Aris grunted, heaving Iconian over his shoulder. "Besides, I don't trust him to stay put." They plunged into the narrow opening of a maintenance tunnel, Aris shoving Iconian ahead of him. Brian sealed the entrance behind them, the metallic clang echoing in the confined space. The tunnel was barely wide enough for Brian to squeeze through. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and stale coolant. Rhea, thankfully, could fit in her chair, though the ride was bumpy. "We should leave him," Aris said, gesturing to Iconian's unconscious form. "He's dead weight." Rhea, her scales shimmering faintly in the darkness, shook her head. "No, we need to know why they did this, why they left me." Her voice, though weak, held a surprising firmness. Brian nodded. "She's right. He knows more than he's letting on." They continued deeper into the tunnel, the darkness pressing in around them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a hidden access panel. Brian punched in the override code, and the panel slid open, revealing a cramped service ladder leading to the outpost's central control room. Inside, the control room was deserted. Alarms blared and red lights pulsed ominously. Brian rushed to the main console, his fingers flying across the interface. "Damn it," he muttered. "The Claw of Xantus is preparing to bombard the outpost from orbit." He rerouted power to the outpost's communication array, the hum of the generators growing louder. Come on," he urged, his eyes glued to the screen as the system rebooted. "Someone has to be listening." "I can try," Rhea offered, her voice strained. "I can try to see what he knows." She looked at Iconian, his face pale and slack. "His mental defenses will be strong, even unconscious," Brian said. He grabbed a discarded Iridian neural disruptor from a nearby console, modifying its settings with practiced ease. "This should weaken his shields just enough." Rhea closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration. This time, Brian felt a surge of energy far more powerful than before. He saw images flash through his mind: sterile laboratories, grotesque experiments, Iridian scientists in sterile white suits. Then Rhea gasped, her eyes snapping open. "Project Chimera," she whispered, collapsing back against her chair, exhausted. Brian knelt beside her, his voice urgent. "What is it? What did you see?" He wasn't just a scientist," Rhea said, her voice barely audible. "He was an architect, Project Chimera. Genetically engineered super soldiers. It's still active. A hidden research facility, beyond Iridian space." Brian's mind raced. They weren't just trying to silence them. They were trying to protect a secret far larger, far more dangerous. Suddenly, the outpost shuddered. A warning klaxon blared, its sound deafening. The console flashed red. "Bombardment sequence initiated," a synthesized voice announced, its tone devoid of emotion. The outpost alarms blared, a klaxon shriek that clawed at Brian's nerves. The Claw of Xantus had begun its bombardment run, the ship's shadow a growing dread on the sensors. He estimated they had minutes, maybe less. Brian sprinted toward the communication array, the floor vibrating beneath his boots. Sparks showered from a damaged conduit overhead, the acrid smell of ozone filling the air. He pounded his fist against the activation panel, the screen flickering to life. Come on," he muttered, fingers flying across the controls. He needed to boost the signal strength, punch through the Iridian jamming field, and reach a human vessel, any vessel. Eris, her face streaked with grime, wrestled with a panel near the power conduit. "I'm rerouting power from life support and environmental controls," she yelled over the din. "It's risky, Brian. We could lose everything." Her hands danced across the circuits, diverting energy with practiced efficiency. The lights flickered, dimmed, then stabilized at a precarious level. In the med bay, Rhea strained against her paralysis, her emerald eyes blazing with a fierce tenacity. She focused her mind on Iconian, the Iridian counselor strapped to a nearby bio bed. "Where is Project Chimera?" She projected, her thoughts a raw, insistent probe. Iconian's mandibles clicked in agitation. Mental shields flared, resisting Rhea's intrusion. Sweat beaded on his chitinous brow. "I will not betray the Dominion," he hissed, his voice a raspy rasp in Brian's head. But Rhea persisted, pushing deeper, bypassing his conscious defenses. A jumble of images, equations, and data streams flooded her mind. She seized on a fragment, a partial memory, a series of coordinates masked within a complex mathematical equation. "Brian," Rhea's mental voice cut through the chaos. "I have coordinates. They're hidden in this equation." She transmitted the sequence to him. Brian ripped his attention from the communication array, inputting the coordinates into the outpost's navigation system. The system whirred, processing the data. A moment later, a new location appeared on the screen, a research facility far beyond Iridian space in a region previously uncharted. "What is this place?" he breathed. "Warning," the navigation system chimed, its tone flat and devoid of emotion. "High probability of hostile defenses detected at designated coordinates." Iconian, sensing the shift in momentum, spat venomously. "Project Chimera. It is our ultimate weapon. Genetically enhanced Iridian soldiers resistant to human weaponry, designed for galactic conquest. His mandibles clicked with manic energy. The bombardment, it is not merely to silence you. It is to destroy the outpost's database. The information is incomplete. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could be used against us. Brian's gut twisted. Destroying the outpost wouldn't just kill them. It would wipe out vital evidence, potentially allowing Project Chimera to progress unchecked. He had to get the information out. "We're broadcasting everything," he declared, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Everything we know about Project Chimera. The galaxy needs to know what the Iridians are planning." Eris looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Brian, are you insane? Broadcasting the data will overload the communication array. It'll be a prime target for the bombardment." "It's the only way," Brian said, his gaze unwavering. He initiated the broadcast sequence, transmitting the data, Rhea's telepathically gathered memories, and every scrap of information they had compiled. As the broadcast went live, a red light pulsed ominously on the array console. The claw of Xantus intensified its attack, targeting the communication array with pinpoint precision. The outpost shuddered violently. The first barrage hit, a concussive blast that sent Brian reeling. Systems flickered and died. The lights plunged into darkness, emergency lights casting long, distorted shadows. Alarms screamed. Then a new alert flashed across a surviving monitor. An automated distress signal had been sent and intercepted, but not by the cavalry. "Brian," Eris said, her voice tight with dread, "we have a problem." She pointed to the message scrolling across the screen. "The ship that intercepted our signal. It's Crawl." Brian's blood ran cold. The Crawl, ruthless mercenaries, scavengers of the void, notorious for their brutality and greed. "They're coming for salvage," he realized. "They're going to take what they can get before the whole place is vaporized." The boarding ramp slammed against the outer hull with a metallic shriek that echoed through the damaged outpost. A guttural roar, amplified by unseen speakers, preceded the Crawl. They poured into the corridor, a wave of scarred flesh and weaponized augmentation. Breck, their captain, led the charge. A hulking figure, cybernetic enhancements grafted onto his thick hide, a network of glowing blue veins pulsed beneath his skin. His eyes, twin crimson orbs, scanned the room with predatory intensity. "Crawl salvage team, secure the perimeter. I want access to this station's database. Now." Breck's voice was a gravelly rasp, each word infused with menace. Brian stood his ground, positioning himself between the Crawl and the main access panel. "This outpost is structurally unsound. About to blow, actually. You're welcome to the scrap, but I wouldn't advise sticking around to collect." He hoped his voice didn't betray the tremor in his hands. Breck snorted, raising a device that emitted a low hum. The air shimmered for a moment as the device scanned the environment. "Structural damage, yes. Imminent explosion, doubtful. Don't waste my time, human. Access codes." Eris, despite his smaller stature, lunged forward, attempting to sever the power cables leading to the boarding ramp. A Crawl warrior reacted instantly, a stun blast knocking Eris off his feet. He crumpled to the floor, twitching. Rhea, still confined to her life support cradle, focused her mind, reaching out to Breck. It was a desperate gamble. She needed to understand their intentions to find a weakness. She pushed, forcing her consciousness against the Crawl captain's mental defenses. It was like hitting a wall of reinforced steel. Breck's mind was a fortress, a chaotic jumble of aggression and ambition. But Rhea persisted, and a flicker, a single fleeting image broke through. A vast fleet of Crawl warships amassing near Iridian space, their cannons glinting in the void. Brian's blood ran cold. They weren't just salvagers. They were vultures, circling the carcass of Iridian civilization, ready to exploit the chaos unleashed by Project Chimera. Breck's gaze snapped to the damaged communication array, wires sparking and exposed. "You sent a message, to whom?" His voice was dangerously low. He gestured towards Aris, still struggling to rise. "Tell me what you broadcast or your friend dies." Before Brian could answer, a voice cut through the tension. "The information is useless to you without the dragon." Iconian stepped forward, his multifaceted eyes glinting. Breck turned his attention to the Iridian counselor. "The genetic anomaly, you recognize its value." He approached the cradle, his crimson eyes fixed on Rhea. "Hand her over, and I might be persuaded to spare your lives." "Never," Brian spat, his hand instinctively reaching for the plasma pistol holstered at his side. The firefight erupted in a blaze of energy. Plasma bolts ripped through the air, tearing chunks out of the already damaged walls. The outpost groaned under the renewed assault. Rhea, sensing Brian's unwavering willpower to protect her, unleashed her own defense. She focused her mind, drawing on the raw horror of the Iridian experiments, and projected those images directly into the minds of the Crawl warriors. Chaos erupted. The Crawl stumbled, clutching their heads, their faces contorted in expressions of terror and revulsion. The psychological impact was immediate, turning seasoned warriors into panicked recruits. Aris, seizing the opportunity, scrambled to his feet and began rerouting power to the outpost's defense systems. A low hum filled the air as a shimmering energy shield flickered into existence, barely containing the onslaught. The shield held, buying them precious time, but Breck's ship, hovering just outside the outpost, opened fire. The energy shield buckled under the barrage, overloaded circuits spitting sparks. Brian watched Rhea, her eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. Her power was far greater than he had imagined. Perhaps, just perhaps, they had a chance. Breck, seeing his warriors falter, accessed a comm channel. "This is Breck. I have located the genetic anomaly designated Rhea. I will relinquish her location in exchange for complete data on Project Chimera. Acknowledge." Suddenly, the viewport shimmered and an Iridian warship decloaked just outside the outpost, its weapons trained on Breck's vessel. As the Iridian boarding party prepared to breach the outpost, Iconian made his choice. He turned to Brian, his voice low and urgent. "I want to leave with you. Now." The world dissolved into a cacophony of screeching metal and alarms. The Iridian ship's plasma cannons tore through the outpost's weakened defenses, ripping a gash in the ceiling above. Debris rained down, showering them in dust and sparking wires. A chunk of durasteel slammed into the console beside Brian, sending a spray of sparks across Rhea's cradle. The Crawl returned fire, their energy weapons lancing out, striking the Iridian ship. The vessel shuddered, momentarily diverting its attention from the outpost. "Move!" Brian yelled, scooping Rhea's cradle into his arms, Aris already pulling Iconian along. They scrambled for cover behind a toppled equipment rack, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal. Iconian, his chitinous face twitching, spat, "They are not here to rescue her, that ship. It's here to eliminate a failed experiment." Brian stared at him, disbelief warring with the urgency of the moment. "What are you talking about?" "Project Chimera," Iconian hissed, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "A program to create enhanced Iridians, genetically modified for warfare." It was deemed too unstable. "Abandoned, Rhea. She is a remnant." Breck's guttural voice boomed through the comms system, overriding the alarms. "Crawl warriors, secure the dragon and any data pertaining to Project Chimera. Riches beyond your wildest dreams await." Rhea stirred in her cradle, her emerald eyes wide with fear and confusion. A tremor ran through her small body. The conflicting emotions, Brian's protectiveness, Iconian's fear, Breck's greed, overwhelmed her. A wave of telepathic energy surged outwards, a raw, uncontrolled burst of power. Suddenly, images flooded Brian's mind. Grotesque scenes of Iridian scientists in sterile white labs, manipulating dragon embryos with cold, uncaring precision. He saw rows of deformed hatchlings, their bodies twisted and broken. The horrific experiments, the chilling lack of empathy. It was all there, raw and unfiltered. He stumbled back, clutching his head. On the Iridian ship, the captain recoiled from his console, his mandibles clicking in distress. He clutched his head, his usually impassive face contorted in a grimace of horror. "She's broadcasting it," Brian gasped, his voice strained. "The experiments, everyone's seeing it." He looked at Rhea, her small body convulsing. "Her powers, they're growing too fast, she can't control it." Breck, realizing what was happening, barked an order. "Neural dampener, suppress the dragon's mind." A crawl warrior shoved a device onto Rhea's head. Instead of suppressing her powers, the dampener amplified them. The telepathic broadcast intensified, becoming a searing psychic assault. The Iridian captain screamed, collapsing onto the deck. The Iridian ship, its crew incapacitated, ceased its attack. Brian, seeing the ship's hesitation, grabbed Iconian's arm. "They saw it. They know. We need to protect her. A temporary alliance. With me." Iconian hesitated, his gaze fixed on Rhea. Her power. Uncontrolled, it could destabilize the entire region. Very well. A temporary alliance, but only to contain her. Aris, ever practical, was already rerouting power. Secondary escape route. Maintenance tunnel, long forgotten, leads to the surface. Brian, working feverishly, connected a human diagnostic tool to an Iridian energy cell, sparks flying. Jury rigging a masking device. Human tech, Iridian power. Should scramble our energy signatures, hopefully enough to slip past their sensors. As they prepared to move, Rhea's voice echoed in Brian's mind, clearer now, yet still fragile. "Hidden. Moon. Crawl. Data." Images flashed. A desolate lunar landscape, a concealed entrance, rows of data servers. A hidden crawl base, the repository of Project Chimera. Suddenly, Breck and two remaining crawl warriors rounded the corner, weapons raised. "Nowhere left to run, little dragon," Breck snarled. "The data, and you, belong to the crawl." Rhea focused her mind, creating illusions. The crawl warriors stumbled, momentarily disoriented, seeing phantom figures and shifting walls. Brian and Aris opened fire, providing cover as Iconian, with surprising speed, accessed a panel and disabled the outpost's internal sensors. "The tunnel!" Aris shouted, shoving them forward. They plunged into the darkness of the maintenance tunnel. As they reached what felt like safety, a deafening explosion rocked the outpost behind them. The tunnel entrance collapsed, burying them in rubble. They were trapped. The air hung thick with dust, illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. Rocks, some the size of Brian's torso, others mere pebbles, were strewn across the tunnel floor. Aris, grunting with effort, heaved a particularly large boulder aside, his mandibles clicking in frustration. Rhea whimpered, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through Brian's bones. The tremors intensified, dust raining down from the ceiling. The emergency lights flickered violently, threatening to plunge them into darkness. "Rhea, easy," Brian said, his voice calm despite the tremor in his own hands. He knelt beside her, placing a hand on her scaled flank. Her skin felt hot, feverish. "Remember what we talked about, the beach. The blue water, the feeling of the sun on your skin." He pictured it himself, the earth he hadn't seen in years. The rhythmic crash of waves, the warmth of the sun, the smell of salt in the air. He focused on those sensations, projecting them outwards, hoping Rhea would latch onto them. Slowly, the tremors subsided. Rhea's breathing became less ragged. But then a new sensation washed over Brian, a jolt of pure, unadulterated anger. It wasn't his. "He's going to give me to them," the thought echoed in Brian's mind, raw and terrified. "He doesn't care about me." Brian's gaze snapped to Iconian, who was carefully examining a section of the collapsed tunnel wall. "Iconian," Brian said, his voice dangerously low. "What are you planning?" Iconian turned, his multifaceted eyes unblinking. "Planning. I am merely assessing the structural integrity of the passage. We must escape." "Don't lie to me," Brian countered. "Rhea, she knows what you're thinking. You're going to hand her over to the Iridian ship." Iconian sighed, a hiss of air that stirred the dust motes dancing in the light. It is for the best, human, her powers. They are too dangerous, uncontrolled. The Iridian Council will contain her safely, study her, prevent her from becoming a weapon. Contain her, Brian scoffed. You mean dissect her, experiment on her. She's not a weapon, Iconian, she's a living being. Aris, sensing the tension, stopped his work and turned towards them, his weapon raised slightly. Iconian ignored Aris, focusing on Brian. You do not understand the potential consequences. Her abilities could destabilize entire civilizations. The Iridians are merely acting responsibly. Brian shook his head. That's not responsibility, that's fear. He turned back to the rubble. Aris, let's focus on clearing this passage. Iconian, if you're not going to help, then stay out of the way. Iconian, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, moved to another section of the tunnel wall, tapping it with a clawed hand. I believe I have found another potential route, he announced, his voice too cheerful, too quick. This way, perhaps. Brian glanced at Rhea, who shook her head slightly. He turned back to Aris. Let's keep going this way. I don't trust him. They worked in silence for several minutes, the only sound the scraping of rock and the rasp of their breathing. Finally, Aris grunted in satisfaction. I think I have it. He heaved a final boulder aside, revealing a narrow opening. Beyond the opening was not the main tunnel, but a small, hidden chamber. And within the chamber, row upon row of stasis pods hummed softly, bathed in an eerie blue light. Rhea gasped, clutching at Brian's arm. He could feel her pain, her fear, amplified 100-fold. They're all here, trapped, suffering. The pods were filled with grotesque forms, failed experiments, half-formed dragons with twisted limbs and vacant eyes. The remnants of Project Chimera, discarded and forgotten. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the ground, stronger than Rhea's uncontrolled bursts of power. The tunnel walls groaned. Crawl! Aris shouted, whirling around, weapon raised. They burst from the collapsed section of the tunnel like enraged insects, their chitinous armor glinting in the dim light. They were armed with crude but effective energy weapons, and their eyes burned with a fanatical zeal. A blast of energy slammed into Aris's shoulder, sending him staggering back against the wall. He cried out in pain, dropping his weapon. Aris! Brian yelled, pulling him behind a large rock. Rhea, stay behind me. The crawl advanced, firing wildly. Brian returned fire with his own weapon, but they were too numerous, too relentless. We can't hold them here, Brian shouted over the din of battle. He scrambled through his pack, pulling out a handful of components salvaged from the Iridian outpost. I need a distraction. He worked quickly, connecting wires and calibrating frequencies. Rhea, I need you to focus. Can you create a diversion? Illusions? Anything to buy us some time. Rhea, her eyes wide with fear, nodded weakly. She closed her eyes, concentrating. The air shimmered around them, and for a moment the crawl hesitated, confused by the shifting images, but the effect was fleeting. Rhea gasped, her body shaking with the effort. It's too much, she whispered. I can't. Brian finished his makeshift device. It was crude, but it might work. Hold on, he said. This might sting. He activated the device. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber, a frequency designed to disrupt the crawl's sensitive auditory systems. The crawl recoiled, clutching at their heads, their movements slowing. Now, Brian yelled. He grabbed Aris, slinging his arm over his shoulder. We have to move. As they stumbled through the chamber, a comm signal beeped through the outpost. A voice, calm and measured, cut through the chaos. This is Captain Vorik of the Iridian vessel Truthseeker. We are detecting Doctor, significant energy signatures emanating from your location. Dr. Williams, are you there? Brian hesitated, then activated his comm. This is Brian Williams. We're under attack by the crawl. We need assistance. We are aware of the situation, Vorik replied. The Iridian Council's actions were regrettable. We offer our assistance in extracting you and the hatchling. We can provide her with proper care. Iconian stepped forward, his voice filled with venom. Do not listen to them, human. It is a trap. They will betray you. Brian ignored him, his eyes fixed on Rhea. He could feel her emotions, a mix of hope and fear. "What do you think?" he asked her. "Can we trust them?" I think so," Rhea projected, "but Conan, he's afraid. He's really afraid of what I can do." Brian nodded. He trusted Rhea's instincts. "Captain Vorik, we accept your offer," he said into the calm. "But we need assurances. What are your terms?" "We will create a controlled breach in the outpost wall, providing a direct escape route to our vessel," Vorik replied. "However, Counselor Iconian must remain behind. His presence complicates matters." Brian's lips pursed. Leave Iconian to face the crawl, it felt wrong. But could he risk trusting Iconian after everything? Could he risk Rhea's safety? He looked at Aris, his face pale with pain. He looked at Rhea, her eyes pleading. He had a decision to make, a difficult, impossible decision. Brian nodded slowly at Aris, a plan forming in his mind. "We'll trust the captain," he said, his gaze firm. "But Iconian comes with us. He needs to face justice for his actions." A flicker of unease crossed Aris's scaled face, but he nodded in agreement. "It shall be as you say, human Brian." As they boarded the sleek Iridian vessel, Rhea focused her mind, sending a clear, concise message to the captain. "Iconian plans to hand me over for further experimentation. He does not believe in justice." The captain's spine stiffened almost imperceptibly, his dedication hardening. Once inside the ship's sterile interior, Brian requested a direct channel to the Iridian Council. The comms officer, a young Iridian with wide, apprehensive eyes, complied. The main viewscreen flickered to life, revealing the assembled council, their faces impassive, their multifaceted eyes glinting in the cold light. "Counselors," Brian began, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. "I have evidence of unethical genetic experiments conducted under your authority, experiments that resulted in Rhea's paralysis and countless other atrocities." A collective murmur rippled through the council. Counselor Iconian stepped forward, his voice dripping with disdain. "This is a rogue element spreading misinformation. Terminate the transmission." Before the comms officer could react, Rhea, guided by Brian's steady presence, focused her mind with all her might. She amplified her telepathic abilities, reaching out across the void, and projecting the raw, unfiltered memories of the Chimera experiments directly into the minds of the council members. The effect was immediate and devastating. Counselors recoiled, clutching their heads, their scales shifting erratically. Images flooded their minds, grotesque creatures born from twisted genetic code, agonizing screams echoing through sterile labs, the cold, calculating faces of scientists devoid of empathy. The sterile chamber became a cacophony of mental anguish. The graphic, undeniable truth of the experiments shattered the council's composure, creating a visible schism within their ranks. Some recoiled in horror, their eyes wide with disbelief. Others remained stoic, their faces betraying only a flicker of unease, but the damage was done. The Iridian captain, witnessing the council's turmoil and bombarded by Rhea's telepathic revelations, stepped forward, his voice ringing with newfound conviction. "I denounce the actions of this council," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. "I pledge my allegiance to a new galactic order, one based on ethics, compassion, and justice for all sentient beings." Aris, emboldened by Brian and Rhea's courage and the captain's defection, rose to the occasion. "I will use my influence to rally other species," he announced, his voice resonating with newfound power. "The old ways are over. It is time for a new era." Brian, seizing the moment, stepped forward. "We need a new galactic charter," he said, his voice filled with passion. "One that emphasizes empathy, ethical scientific progress, and the rights of all sentient beings, regardless of physical or genetic differences." The idea resonated throughout the chamber, spreading like wildfire. Within weeks, species from across the galaxy rallied in support, signing the new charter and forming a new galactic alliance. Humans, once considered a minor species, found themselves playing a key role in shaping the Alliance's values and policies, their unique blend of empathy and ingenuity proving invaluable. Rhea, now a symbol of hope and resilience, embraced her telepathic abilities, using them to foster understanding and communication between different species, bridging cultural divides and promoting empathy where once there was only fear and misunderstanding. Brian and Rhea dedicated their lives to helping others like her, establishing research centers focused on ethical advancements in medicine and technology, ensuring that no one was left behind, that every sentient being had the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their physical or genetic limitations. Iconian, stripped of his power and influence, was brought to trial before the new Galactic Alliance. His actions were condemned, but in a spirit of compassion and justice, he was given a chance at redemption.